Hi, this is Bruce Katz of the Bruce Katz Band and Gregg Allman and Friends.
Are you here? Well, let me say that with you as our listener, the pleasure is all ours as we say, welcome to the Paul Leslie Hour. We have an interesting interview from our radio archives today. We're pleased to present our interview with pianist, organist, songwriter, and recording artist Bruce Katz of the Bruce Katz Band. The great John Hammond said this about Bruce Katz. "This man is as good as it gets. One of the greatest keyboard artists I've ever heard." The particular interview with Bruce Katz that you're about to hear was originally broadcast on radio in October 2007. Bruce was touring with the legendary Gregg Allman and Friends, and his project, the Bruce Katz Band's most recent album, was A Deeper Blue. We've got more interviews coming down the pike. With who? Well, with the amazing musicians who worked with Gregg Allman, and many other interviews with other great artists. Would you please subscribe to Paul Leslie's YouTube channel and like the Paul Leslie Hour on Facebook? And now, I think it's time we unseal this interview with Bruce Katz. Hey, let's listen together.
We'd like to say hello to Mr. Bruce Katz of the Bruce Katz Band. Thank you for giving us this interview on behalf of all of our listening audience.
Well, glad to be here.
Mr. Katz, I was wondering, how did you discover the Hammond B3 organ?
That's a good question. Actually, I think when I was a little kid and I remember seeing Mahalia Jackson, the great gospel singer, on TV. She was very famous at the peak of her popularity. She sort of crossed over into everything, and I just remember hearing that sound. Then actually, I was doing some work in a recording studio, and there was this was a long time ago, there was a Hammond B3, and I just started messing around with it. But, it was part of the sound of a lot of things back in the 70s. But yeah, I remember hearing gospel stuff and just going, wow. I was already playing piano. The Hammond definitely spoke to me.
And the latest album from the Bruce Katz Band is called A Deeper Blue, and the liner notes say that more so than your other records, it connects with that primal feeling blues music is all about. And I was wondering if you can put into words and describe that primal feeling.
Oh, man. Yeah, well, that is a good question. I wish I really could describe it because I teach. Sometimes I'm trying to get my students to connect with that exact feeling. I don't know. I think you kind of look inward to yourself and just try to find. This is just what I'm doing, I guess. Just try to find this sort of inner truth that you can then express and look inward and outward at the same time. It's definitely not about how many licks you can play. That can be a whole nother thing. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's an emotional place, and it's sort of a true place, and it's a little hard to describe.
It does seem, though, that more so than other types of music, that blues is like a feeling. And I was wondering, as far as blues bands or musicians just in general, if you could tell us about some of your all-time favorites.
In piano, there are some obvious ones. Otis Spann, the great pianist, who played with Muddy Waters and basically invented modern Chicago blues piano. Albert Ammons and Pete Johnson, the great boogie-woogie piano players. I'm really into the New Orleans piano players. Contemporary, who's actually alive, because most of the people I'm mentioning are not. A contemporary who's alive that I really admire is Henry Butler from New Orleans, but also very much into James Booker and Professor Longhair and people like that. My music's kind of eclectic, and staying with piano players that cross over into some other genres. Thelonious Monk for his humor and angular weirdness, the great jazz piano player, and Charles Mingus and Freddie King, and just other instruments. Organ players, I guess my favorite organ player is probably Jimmy McGriff, because I think he's playing from a more gospel-y, soulful place, even though obviously Jimmy Smith is great and there's other great ones. Jimmy McGriff has that emotional content that I'm always kind of looking for. Okay, here's a short list. How's that?
One of the songs on your album that I like a lot is Stovepipe Boogie. So I was wondering if you could tell us about that song and how you came up with the title.
Actually, it's a duet between piano and drum, and the drummer came up with the title because he called what he was playing a stovepipe beat, and I'm not even sure why it's a stovepipe beat. So that's where the name came from, Ralph Rosen, the drummer. But yeah, I just love doing that two-handed driving boogie-woogie thing where you don't even need a bass player because your left hand is just laying it down. And I've recorded a few other varieties of boogie-woogie over the years. It's really, it's a great art form, and very few people really play it, but there aren't that many real two-handed piano players out there. There's a lot of one-handed piano players. And people really respond to it. They don't hear it too often. Then when they hear it, people kind of go crazy, which I guess is why Boogie Woogie in the 40s was this wild craze for about 5 or 6 years. But yeah, Stovepipe Boogie.
I was wondering on the album A Deeper Blue if there was any cut in particular that was a favorite of yours.
My problem is I always like the slow, dark ones. The Dark Room might be my favorite on the whole album. That's a slow one on piano. Blues in D natural, which I didn't write, is probably one of my favorites. That one's actually featuring my old band leader that I used to play with, Ronnie Earl, on guitar. He's on 2 tunes on the album. And that one, Blues in D natural, is just like flat out just screaming, and that's fun too. I don't know. Greasy Sticks, great shuffle. And I like the way that For Cliff came out, which is a little spacier kind of tune that was actually written for a friend of mine that had unfortunately just killed himself riding a motorcycle. I wrote that tune for him because he liked that kind of jam band kind of music.
I was reading about some of your educational pursuits, like teaching the organ, and you mentioned a little bit about your academic side. But also, I thought it was interesting about the advanced class on the blues.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering how long you've been doing that.
Well, I've been teaching part-time at Berklee College in Boston for 12 years, actually. And it's cool. I do 2 heavy days of teaching there, but they let me go on the road, and as long as everything works out, like in a week and a half, I'm going out with Gregg Allman for 2.5 weeks, and school's okay with it as long as I have subs or whatever. I teach lessons and theory classes, and I also formulated this history and analysis of blues course for Berklee. That's kind of my course that I made, and they approved and put it in the curriculum. And yeah, I don't know if there's any course as thoroughly looking at blues music anywhere. To tell you the truth, I haven't heard of one. We start out by listening to like the pre-blues, field hollers and work songs and spirituals, and we work up. We sort of go through every style of country blues, East Coast country blues, Texas country blues, and classic and piano and pre-war Chicago, post-war Chicago, dump. There's a lot of styles. So it's real cool because we kind of really look at each style and analyze it. It's listen to it. It's mostly about the listening and understanding the music, but actually look at it closely and figure out what it is and try to appreciate it on various levels, the emotional level, the intellectual level. So that's what that is.
It does sound like a fascinating class.
Yeah, people seem to like it. We also kind of just look at American history and social history because it's hard to study blues without talking about the sharecropping system, all sorts of other stuff about why did all these African American people flood into Chicago after 1945 and thus, started about 15 years earlier than that, but it really started going crazy after that. And how did that affect the music? It really affected music. So yeah, it's a cool class. I like it, and I kind of learn stuff every time I teach it.
You mentioned a little while ago Gregg Allman, and you perform with Gregg Allman and Friends, and I was wondering how you met Mr. Allman.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Having been a big fan of the Allman Brothers all my life. Well, I moved a couple years ago up to Woodstock, New York, up here in the mountains here, about 100 miles north of New York City. Started to play with Levon Helm, the great singer and drummer for the band, and I play at a lot of his Midnight Ramble shows. I don't know if you've heard about these shows up here in Woodstock that are amazing. It's like at Levon's house, but his house also has a barn that's a recording studio and a performance space. And a couple of times a month, there are shows, and 200 people pay to come. It's real down home, and the bands are great, and guests show up out of the blue. And we've had like Emmylou Harris and Elvis Costello and Alan Toussaint and Joan Osborne and the Holmes brothers. It's pretty cool. So anyway, I sort of fell into that gig. And then I met Jay Collins, who was a saxophone player who occasionally plays at the Midnight Ramble, and he's been with Gregg for 6 years. They needed somebody for the summer. Jay recommended me. It was right at the time that the Allman Brothers were doing one of the runs at the Beacon Theater in New York City. You know, they do like 12 or 15 shows in a row practically at the Beacon Theater, usually in March and April. And so he mentioned me to Gregg, and Gregg told him to tell me just to come down to the Beacon Theater and sit in with the Allman Brothers, and that would be my audition. It was freaky, man. And so I went down to the Beacon Theater. I'm standing off to the side, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, go up. And so Gregg was playing organ, and I was sort of sitting on the organ bench facing the piano, because he sets the piano at like 90-degree angles. So we were both squeezed onto the organ bench, and I think I played Stormy Monday, and then like Southbound, and then a little Milton tune that Susan Tedeschi got up and sang. And that was my audition in front of 3,000 screaming fans. So it was high pressure, but I guess it came out good. But yeah, it was one of those things that was just fabulous. And now Gregg wants me to keep playing with him, and I'm so glad to do it, you know. I mean, he sounds just utterly great these days. I mean, it sounds like he did it at the height of his powers. It's really wonderful to hear. So, yeah.
You've had the distinction of playing on a lot of interesting albums from some of the greats. For example, you had just mentioned a Little Milton tune, and you actually played on the Little Milton album, and you mentioned before the interview about being featured on a John Hammond album.
Uh-huh.
And just, I'm sure that was the experience you just mentioned with Gregg Allman. That had to have been a memorable moment. So I was wondering, out of all these experiences, is there any that you can't believe happened? You know what I mean?
Well, the Gregg Allman thing. I think standing up there at the Beacon Theater and playing with the Allman Brothers, that was definitely one. I've had a few here and there. But yeah, I mean, actually, and now I kind of have an open invitation to sit in with the brothers, and I actually sat in with them like 3 more times this summer just for fun in various places, and that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky, and you know, the John Hammond thing, who also I had seen many times when I was much younger, and I had a bunch of his records, and you know, one day about a year and a half ago, I came home and I put on my answering machine. And there was a message. Hi, this is John Hammond, and I'm recording a new album, and I really like your playing. I'd like you to call me. And you know, that was one of those. Wow. Playing with Chuck Berry in front of like 10,000 people. I only played with him a few times, but you know, that was I'm playing Johnny Be Good on a grand piano in front of 10,000 people in Europe, going, yeah, this is pretty good. There have been some moments. I mean, I've been a big band fan as well, and so the first time that I showed up and played with Levon Helm is another moment of wow. You know, I'm sort of pinching myself.
This last question that I have, since this program goes out all over the world, I'd like to know what you would like to say to the world.
What would I like to say to the world? Wow, boy, you're killing me here, man. I don't know. I would say go out and hear live music. Get away from that computer and go out and hear live music. You're going to remember a great live show for the rest of your life, but you're not going to remember necessarily some other thing that you do every day. And it seems hard to get people to go out sometimes. And there's a lot of great musicians trying to say something, and I think there's fewer and fewer places to go out. So go out, see a band or a piano player. Because, really, I mean, I can remember particular shows from 1978 that I saw that I'll never forget, but not necessarily what I did on Thursday, May in 78.
Well, thank you so much for the interview.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to hear all the Allman Brothers related folks, right?
That's right. It's going to be a continuing series, and this is going to be the first show of the Gregg Allman and Friends portion. So it'll be exciting, and I'm also looking forward to seeing Gregg Allman and Friends this year.
Are you coming out to any of these shows in October?
I'm going to try to go to the one in Atlanta.
Okay, yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, and enjoy the world.
Okay. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
We thank you and appreciate you dropping in for the Paul Leslie Hour today. You can help the Paul Leslie Hour in our mission to provide independent media content like this by visiting www.thepaulleslie.com/support. We truly thank you. This is your announcer speaking. Performance of The Entertainer intro song and Corina outro song, courtesy of John Primorano. Well, that's it for today. So until next time, be safe and be good.